We continue with the discussion of halakha following the analysis of Rabbi David Shlush, and he speaks about the rules of determining halakha. So, when we look at the Talmud, the Gemara, he says that the rules were determined by the following concepts. If the two people who are in dispute are a master and a student, or his disciple, then we follow the master, the Rav. If they are both on an equal level, meaning they're both masters or rabbis in their own right, we follow the one which is mehudad yoter, the one which whose method is clearer or his mind is sharper. If you can determine that, if we have among those two scholars one which is more a greater expert in a certain field, then we follow him on that field. Like I mentioned yesterday, when Rav and Shemuel disagree, we follow Shemuel on monetary laws and Rav on other laws. And finally, if we have two rabbis who are maybe on have an equal standing and equal expertise, we follow the later rabbi. Why? Mishum shera divrei harishonim shelefanav, because he has could have greater knowledge, knowing the writings and the opinions of those who lived before him, and maybe new information that was not available to the previous posek. So, following what people consider the final editing of the Talmud, the general rule that is accepted by most poskim is halakha kevatra'ei. We always follow the latest generation. We don't overturn rulings that we find in the Mishnah, in the Talmud, but from now on, we always follow the later authority, because we assume that later authority has greater access to information, etc. But not necessarily everybody follows the rules that were determined after the sealing of the Talmud. Now, on a sort of a side note, we have to mention that Rabbi Shlush says here that when there is a disagreement between the two Talmudim that we have two books that are called Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud and the Israeli or Eretz Israel Talmud, and they don't always agree. And the rule among the rabbis was we always follow the Babylonian Talmud because it was later in time. It was its final edition, or sort of like the canonization of the Talmud, took place about 100 years after the Talmud of Eretz Israel. But as we know today, this is a rule that is questionable, because, as a matter of fact, none of those books, the Babylonian Talmud or the Israeli Talmud, had a final editing, but rather it was a period where people stopped adding to it officially. So there are still loose ends there. That's number one. Number two, the more important concept that we have to have in mind is that there was a deliberate campaign by the Babylonian rabbis to diminish the authority of the Israeli Talmud. There was a question of hierarchy, of hegemony, who was going to be in control, because it also meant power and money and influence over the whole Jewish world. So because of that, they started pushing the Talmud Yerushalmi, the Eretz Israel Talmud, away at around the 8th century. And as a result, after about 300 years that people didn't study the Talmud Yerushalmi on a regular basis, they lost the ability to fully understand it, especially since it's full of words in Greek and Latin that were not spoken in Babylonian. So this is something that today, when you come to determine halakha, one could say that there is the rabbi, the posek, has a mandate to look at the Yerushalmi Talmud and see where it deviates from the Babylonian Talmud, and maybe find a new way to understand halakha from there. So, but from here we follow to the next question that the Rabbi Shlush presented at the beginning, and that is, if a rabbi or a community are allowed to follow one opinion, meaning to determine that they want to follow all the halachot of one rabbi, whether it's lenient or stringent. I mean, the case in question that it doesn't write about this specifically, but very relevant and applicable in his time in Israel during the 20th century, from the 1960s on, is the quest of Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, who was eventually the chief rabbi of Israel, to reestablish the practice of the Shulchan Aruch. Rabbi Ovadia Yosef from the very beginning said he wants everyone to follow the rulings of Rabbi Yosef Karo in the Shulchan Aruch. And his argument was that Rabbi Yosef Karo was the chief rabbi of Israel, and as the chief rabbi of Israel in the 1500s, his rulings are binding for everybody who lives in Israel. Now, there are other problems with that, which Rabbi Mesas also brings up, which are that when Rabbi Yosef Karo lived in Israel, there were only several hundred people in Israel, and most Jews lived outside Israel. So he was the chief rabbi of a small community, and not of the whole Sephardic world. In any case, Rabbi Ovadia Yosef wanted to, in the beginning of his career, he wanted everyone in Israel to follow the rulings of the Shulchan Aruch, both Ashkenazim and Sephardim, and obviously Temanim, the Yemenites. Eventually, he mellowed to say, okay, only the Sephardim who should follow the Shulchan Aruch, but there was really a quest for which he fought adamantly. I mean, anyone who would say that we follow, let's say, the Iraqi customs or the Moroccan customs or anything else, it would knock it out completely. It's impossible to accept it according to his opinion. And as I mentioned also, he was against Rabbi Shalush for writing that. He refused to sign an approval for his book, even though they were good friends and colleagues, because he says, if you question my approach to the Shulchan Aruch, I cannot agree with your book. So when Rabbi Shalush raises this question, אם רשאי רב או קהל לקבל עליו לפסוק כפוסק אחד בכל אשר יאמר, if a community or rabbi are allowed to choose one rabbi from previous generations and say we were going to follow only this rabbi, the case to which this question is applicable is the rule of the Shulchan Aruch over the modern state of Israel today. So he brings different different cases, and two major opinions. One is the Ma'ari ben Lev, also from around the time of Rabbi Yosef Karo, says that בדיני איסור והיתר אין בני העיר יכולים לתקן ללכת אחד אחר הפוסקים. He says that regarding questions of kashrut, isur v'heter, what laws other than monetary laws, there's no the dwellers of a certain city or community cannot determine one authority that they want to follow, but they rather have to refer to the full literature that exists. So he says, in that case, you have many opinions. Either you follow the most the strictest opinion, or the majority. If you could put together majority and that majority is lenient, then you could follow it. And this is part of what I mentioned yesterday, that the idea of that you always have to look at precedents. So according to Ma'ari ben Lev, you have to look at the precedents. And if there are 1,000 precedents, you have to consider them all and count all the opinions and put them together. But on the other hand, he quotes the Rashba, Rabbi Shlomo ben Adret, who lived in Spain in the 1400s. And he says, in the 14th century, he says, he brings the rules that you would follow when there is a dispute. Either you follow the one who was greater in wisdom, or the senior rabbi. It says, if they are both on an equal standing in terms of their knowledge, if the matter at hand is a biblical one, would be called deoraita, you follow the strictest opinion. And if it's a rabbinical issue, something that has to do with a decree that was made by the rabbis of the Mishnah or the Talmud, then you follow the more lenient opinion. It says, "Aval im haya rav echad bimkomam velimdam, holchim achar derachav." But if they have a local rabbi and he has his own teachings, you follow the teachings of that rabbi. Because, as we mentioned yesterday, this is called Ashofet Asher Yeh Bayamim Hahem. This is the local contemporary judge. He knows the community. He understands their needs, and this is how they should behave. This is who they should follow. And so his conclusion is this: En kahal orav rashai likbor lahem posek echad lifsok kechol asher yomar. So it's not really acceptable for a community to say we only follow the rulings of one authority, and we don't deviate to the right or to the left, because they can have their particular circumstances or needs that may not apply to another community. So, I mean, this, by the way, does not. We don't talk right now about practices of tefillah. The rituals of tefillah is a different issue. You want in a synagogue, you want to follow a certain minhag. Could be Moroccan minhag, Yerushalmi minhag. It's fine, as long as there is a consensus in the synagogue. It's fine. But even with that, we have to have in mind that most of the deviations that you could have in a synagogue are not worth fighting for. When you want to fight for something in the synagogue, you're allowed to, but that is when you want to fight. Wait, I'm going to qualify that. If you're fighting or standing up to defend someone's dignity or rights, that is where you should stand up and protest if it's not done in the right manner. But if it's a question of, are we taking off the tefillin before the Kaddish, after the Musaf, if the Hazan skipped something that you think he should have said, or even if someone, as happened in one of the synagogues where I was, someone was called to be the Hazan and he was wearing shorts, not sure, like 3/4, and someone yelled at him, this is not where you fight. This is where actually I had to rebuke the one who rebuked the guy, says because he was embarrassed publicly. Because at the end of the day, what we do in the Bet Knesset, Tefillah, we want to direct our prayers to God. Kadosh Baruch Hu understands whatever you say, he can understand. What he would not understand is how people could fight in the synagogue over these practices. So it's not worth it. So, but in other issues, when it comes to issues of kashrut, and other issues, רב המקום שיבוא אחריו, אם יש לו ראיות לשנות את ההלכה, יכול לשנות. So even if in a case where the rabbi of a locality or a community ruled in a certain way, the rabbi who comes after him has the permission or has the mandate to change his halakha if he has strong enough proofs. And I mean, there are certain cases where the ruling of a local rabbi could be baseless, and in other cases it could be. But even in that case, people are afraid to change it. And for example, there's one city in America. I'm not sure where exactly it's at. That's what I heard, but it's a possibility that there is a certain community that they do not eat bananas on Pesach because their rabbi of that community came from Europe just after the war, and was already at an old age. So the first Pesach that he was there, people came and asked, could you eat bananas on Pesach? He didn't know what a banana is. And even if they showed him, he couldn't figure out what this fruit is. And just to be safe, he says, you cannot eat it on Pesach. He passed away shortly after that. He didn't have time to investigate the matter. And they say, with this minhag, we don't eat bananas on Pesach, right? I mean, this is a silly case. Of course, the next in line would say, okay, there was a complete mistake here, but they still follow it, right? And that is where we have a problem. But it says that we have a rule, En la dayan ela ma she'einav ro'ot. Whatever the judge the rabbi analyzes the sources, analyzes the circumstance and the special evidence, and he rules based on that. He says it's obvious, that's a very important paragraph, and with that we conclude today. פשוט לכולי עלמא מודו שהקהל חייב לשמוע לרב המקום ולעשות ככל אשר יאמר בין להקל בין להחמיר. There's no argument that, of course, when we see that the rabbi is holding certain standards and is honest in his behavior, that the community should follow his rulings, whether he's lenient or stringent. But the opinion is that he calls rabbi-ovadia ben Rabbeinu Asher, אסור בהחלט לרב פוסק ההלכה לסמוך על פוסק אחד ככל אשר יאמר. But that rabbi himself cannot say, I'll take everything from this book. When the people of the community come and ask the rabbi a question, he's not allowed to say, okay, let me look up, I will follow only the Shulchan Aruch, I will follow only Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, only Rabbi Mordechai Eliyahu, to mention some, right? אלא עליו לעיין בכל הלכה ולהעמיק בה ולפסוק כראות עיניו. He is obligated to analyze in depth every issue and to determine the law, whether it's lenient or stringent. And when the Talmud says that you cannot be, that this could be what people call pick and choose. I heard people saying when for example, when I write halachot, and people say, wait, but you're following, on that halakha you do follow Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, and on that halakha you don't follow him, you follow another posek. How can you pick and choose? The answer is this: you don't pick and choose if you don't study the halachot in depth. אבל ברב גמיר וסביר הוא פוסק לקהילתו. But if the rabbi is knowledgeable and can analyze and understand the halakha, not only is allowed to pick and choose in a sense, but אסור לו לפסוק ככול עיון וכחומרון דחכם אחד. He must pick and choose. He must apply. If he decides eventually that he would after analyzing after every halakha, that this is the opinion that he wants to rely on, it happens to be the same rabbi, fine. But he has to go through the process. Otherwise, they don't need the rabbi for halachot. They need him just to be a figurehead. And whenever they need the halakha, they would go and consult the book. I had this situation in one community where during Kriyat Torah, someone came to me and said, my daughter-in-law gave birth. She wants to say agomel. Can she say agomel? And obviously, a woman who gives birth, after giving birth, should say agomel. That's a practice in Israel and many other communities. Because even though it's not mentioned in the Talmud, but what is birkat agomel? We say it after our life was at risk. Most men would never experience a near-death experience as women experience when they deliver. It's really, we just got used to it, thank God, it works. But there are dangerous situations. And it's a medical procedure. A woman should say agomel. So I told him, yes, she could say agomel. Interesting enough, that particular case, that particular man was someone that, no, not him, I mean the couple, the woman that gave birth, was able eventually to have a child based on a certain halachic ruling that I gave her that solved a certain situation. So in a way, it should have been some gratitude there, but it turned out that he did it as a sort of to create friction. Because he came during Kriyat Torah, he asked, "Can we do that?" I said, "Yes." I didn't know that in his community, women don't say agomel in the Bet Knesset. And he wanted to make a case out of it. So at the certain point I paused the reading, and the woman was standing in the women's section, and I said, "Go ahead, say the blessing." And she said agomel, and after that, right away, you hear the murmur through the synagogue. What's going on? So when I gave the speech, I said, I assume that the reason people started talking in Kriyat Torah is because of agomel. I don't assume that it was because you were arguing over a certain interpretation of the pasuk that I was reading. They said, yeah, we don't say Agomer, and they start to explain the halacha. And still some people said, no, we never do it, we don't do it ever. So who do you follow? Right? You say, we follow Rabbi Ovadia Yosef. Okay, so follow Rabbi Ovadia Yosef. They come to me a day later, like they say, oh, we checked the books of Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, the Yalkut Yosef. He says that what you did was the right thing. I said, thank you very much. Thank you very much. But this is not what you do. This is not how the community should react. So you have a rabbi, the rabbi issued a halacha. Even if it's not your minhag, you accept it for now, then you could raise the question, then you can have a debate, look at the sources, and then maybe you will come to the conclusion that you could either decide our minhag is incorrect because women should say the beracha, they should be acknowledged in the synagogue, or you're going to determine, even though other people do it, we're not going to do it in the synagogue. But in any case, the reaction in that way is not the appropriate one. But Rabbi Shlush, at this point, we got to the point where he says that the rabbi is obligated to do an in-depth analysis and arrive at the halacha, which is appropriate for the time and place. Baruch Adonai.